Coming up on today's episode of the DLLS Mavs Podcast, we are joined live in studio by our special guest, former NBA All-Star Devin Harris, joining us here on the DLLS Mavs Podcast. We'll get into the first half of the season and more coming up next year on our show. Here we go. Hey, what's up, DLLS Mavs Nation? It's your man, Kevin Gray, alongside Mavericks beat writer Tim Cato and special guest, former Dallas Maverick and former NBA All-Star Devin Harris, joining us on the show today. Really appreciate you joining us here on DLLS Sports. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe while you're here as well. You can do the same for our podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. How are the Mavericks after their first half of the season? We'll get into that. Plus, we'll answer some questions, have some questions answered by our guy, Devin Harris, today here on our show. Really appreciate all of you joining us as we have a fun show planned for you. Of course, Devin Harris, the 5th overall pick back in the 2004 NBA draft. Do you remember the first 4 guys ahead of you?
Of course I do. Dwight Howard, Emeka Okafor, Ben Gordon, and Sean Livingston.
Okay. So you remember all 4 of the guys before you.
Yeah.
Okay, now name everybody who came after you.
I said, do you remember the rest of the first round afterwards? We won't make you remember all those. Of course, 15 years in the NBA, 10 of those with the Dallas Mavericks, 2009 NBA All-Star, and now in studio and game analyst for Mavericks Television. How you liking Mavericks Television so far?
You know, it was a struggle at first.
Yeah.
Getting used to being on the other side of things, but through a lot of hard work and just experience, really starting to come into my own a little bit. Had some great helps. Dana's been great. Obviously working with Followell, Harper, all those guys have been really good and instrumental in me growing in that area. So it's been fun.
Well, I want to let you know that someone on this set helped you along the way for your career. Tanner, we got the picture to go ahead and put up real quick before we continue in our show. I was actually instrumental in helping you out in your career, actually, almost 6 years ago. Do you remember this? This is at SportsCon.
Yes.
Almost 6 years
You're
ago.
You're showing him the ropes, it looks like.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel I helped Devin get to where he is as far as his career. No, I'm just joking. No, that was a fantastic day. But, yeah, I wanted to make sure I bring it up because I didn't know if you would remember or not. But you certainly helped me out in my career on the way. So, you know, little stroll down memory lane.
Yes, absolutely.
For us there. So, but, yeah, let's just get into it. The Mavericks, of course, now through 41 games of the season, 22-19, unfortunately took a loss on the road last night to the New Orleans Pelicans. Before we get to the overall big scope of how this first half has gone so far, just your thoughts on the game last night, how it went down. And, of course, we know about the unfortunate missed call with the goaltending last night.
Yeah, I think coming off the bad performance against Denver, I thought the guys really kind of battled hard. It was kind of be a ground-out game. They're kind of hurt. We're hurt. And I think from an offense standpoint, we got off to a great start. Obviously, defensively, we struggled a little bit, but Gaff getting back on track, I thought was awesome.
Yeah.
Hardy's been playing great. He's been shooting, lights out all of January, going back to a little bit in December. But obviously, everybody's going to be talking about the last, few minutes of the game, some key turnovers. Obviously, the missed goaltend was a missed opportunity, but those are the type of games I think that you look back on, you're kind of like, wow, we let one go.
Yeah. Wow, I wanted to slip away last night.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the situation Dallas is in. They've had some games that have slipped away. I think it's realistic if you look at where the team is and how many wins they're going to have to tally once Luka gets back. This might end up being a play-in team just based off the circumstances. It's a little too soon to say that for sure. But if that ends up being the case, it's going to be tough to look back at some games like this one and just see how they slipped.
Yeah, and obviously we look at early in the season too when we really struggle with those clutch games, right?
Yeah.
Kind of learning how to win as a team, all those opportunities, that when we need wins, going to look back and like, man, we could have been better, we should have been better. But obviously I think with all the injuries and everything that's going on and we're treading water, I think better than most.
Sure.
But when Luka gets back, yeah, we're gonna have to fast track and really kind of get into the things.
When their entire starting lineup is present, they've won about 80% of the games. Yeah. So you can look at the 26 games after the All-Star break and think realistically, Dallas can go 20-6, 21-5. It just would be nicer if the team was like 26, had 26 wins, had 27 wins, and that gives you a little bit of like margin for error. And it's just they're really eating into that margin of error right now.
And you guys started to get into it a little bit. Kind of the story of the first half of the year has been the injuries for this team. Obviously, with Luka Doncic, who is still out with the calf strain, Kyrie Irving dealing with the bad back right now as well. Lively has missed time. The bubonic plague that apparently got through the entire Mavericks team at one point was really something that was a story as well. But you start looking at the season. They started off 5-7, then they rip off 14-17. Then recently had a 5-game losing streak. Now currently on a 3-game losing streak. What's kind of been your overall sense of how this season has gone so far, given the up and down nature of what this team has been dealing with?
I think when this team is healthy, they are a contending team. Obviously, with the injuries and the plague that we talked about, Nico put this team together with depth in mind, knowing that, at some point, Kai's going to need a break. At some point, Luka's going to miss some games. So I think the guys that we've brought in have been really instrumental. The Quentin Grimes, Najee Marshall. And I think, especially with Najee, I didn't know his offensive game was as deep as it is. I don't think he got that same opportunity in New Orleans, but I didn't know he could really go the way that he goes, shooting the ball well, obviously 39%, but his floaters and how we can run the offense through him, I think has been a breath of fresh air. We saw this version of Grimes, I feel like, in New York, and we knew what he was capable of. I think he's gotten back to that level. So all these guys are been instrumental with time out with those guys, but how it all fits together when we have everybody, I think we have yet to see what that looks like because we really haven't had these guys together that long.
Jason Kidd earlier this year described Najee as a East Coast hooper. Yeah. It's a very different game. Like, he's much more herky-jerky, and I mean that positively, than, say, Quentin Grimes, who's very smooth and elegant. But, I mean, just, like, what type of appreciation do you have for a player who just, like, knows how to go get buckets?
Well, especially when you need that, and when Luka and Kai off the floor. But more importantly, though, what kind of teammate he is. When you got a guy that's willing to give a right hook for your teammate,
he's willing to go to scrap for you.
That to me shows that you ride for your other teammates. I feel like that team chemistry really picks up because I had a guy like that growing up when I was in Stackhouse. I knew if anybody messed with me in any type of wrong way, he was going to come running. Josh Howard was going to come running. We had that kind of bond, and I feel like when you got guys like that ride for you, that shows that this team is really connected.
How do you lean on that during tough times when you're going through losing streaks or up and down play, leaning on your teammates to be able to get through some of these up and down waves to be able to figure it out once guys get healthy and then go from there?
I mean, you lean into guys knowing that you're going to need bigger roles. Sure. But, like, typically on good teams, like, and I'll use the Celtics, for instance, like, if Tatum doesn't play or Brown doesn't play, typically the ball is going to be working in certain areas. Pritchard's going to get more of a bigger role, those type of guys, Porzingis, Horford. But I think with us, it's not the same guy every night, and we need to depend on different guys. One night it might be Spencer, one night it might be Najee, one night it might be with Quentin, and that's great when you have that type of depth. But I think sometimes we get lost in not knowing who that person is going to be night in and night out, especially when our stars are out.
Last night, prior to last night's game, the last 5 games before that, it was 5 different guys that led the Mavericks in scoring. Right. So to your point about different guys having to be dependent upon night in and night out to do some of that scoring, we've been finding that out, unfortunately, with the services of Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Aside from health from this team, what's the one thing as we start looking forward to the second half of the year you feel like the Mavericks can take with them to be able to hopefully get on a little bit of a run once those guys come back?
I mean, I think the defensive end of the floor, obviously with Lively and Gafford, you got 2 shot blockers that are going to be in the game at all times. Najee's really solid defensively. Quentin can get after a little bit. When Kai and Luka come back, I feel like those guys are tied in. But you can win games. When you go on these stretches, it's not always going to be offensive. But when your defense carries and travels, that's when you start going to run. And we saw it similar to last year when they won, 18 out of 19? Mm-hmm. I feel like defensively we were tied in. You could tell the difference when we kind of flipped that switch on.
How about for you? What's the one thing they got to carry over from what was a difficult first half of the first 41 games that can be replicable going forward for the rest of the year, even when Luka and Kyrie come back?
Yeah, I find it interesting how much they, have seen role players in different roles being able to step up and fill in and, turn into a third scorer even in a given night. I don't think this team has a third scorer. I guess like throughout, is like third scorer, is that a role that like you usually have on a team?
You do, and it's typically a guy that preferably gets most of his when the other two guys are on the bench.
Mm-hmm.
So he's running the second unit, but I think with this team, it's by committee,
right?
And I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing.
I agree. The tricky thing is knowing when, and so Jason Kidd talked about this in the second Denver game. Kyrie comes back, and then Jason Kidd's assessment of what happened is that everybody was like, "Oh, Kyrie's back."
Right.
He's going to carry us. Like we can lean on him. And so all these guys who are stepping up in his absence, and obviously Luka's been out this entire time, but all these guys maybe dialed it back just a little bit. And so I guess the tricky thing is that if you're not the third scorer, and tell me about this mentality, tell me if I'm wrong, but if you're not the third scorer, sometimes you can assume, well, somebody else is going to be the third scorer, when in reality, the mentality has to be there that one person is aware that, okay, if this is my night, I have to step into that role. Like every single night, you have to know whether you are stepping into that role, whether you aren't. And obviously, it's a very fluid thing. It fluctuates. Just because someone goes off for a good first quarter, the guy who may be the third scorer might be different in the fourth quarter. It might be Najee who has a good fourth quarter, Quentin Grimes who has a good second quarter, something like that. But that is the one tricky part I would imagine about just the mentality that goes into that.
It is. And when the roles are fluid, it's hard to know which night is going to be your night. I think everybody would be a little bit better off if it was more like, okay, this is what we expect from you. This is what we need from you on a night-to-night basis. Obviously, with injuries and stuff that happens, those roles changes. And I'll throw Spencer out there, for instance. There's been times where he's been the 12th man on the roster. There's been times he's been the 6th man.
DMPs early in the season.
100%. Yeah. And what they need from him on a night-to-night basis changes depending on who's on the floor. And sometimes that can kind of mess with their head a little bit, not knowing how to operate, how aggressive to be. Do I need to be more of a playmaker? You reading that game situation. Now, there's nobody that reads the game better than I feel like Kyrie and understanding when to pick it up and when to score. But I think with Spence, it's sort of been a challenge for him to figure out what that nightly role looks like and how to be effective in that short amount of time and figure out, how to read that game. And I feel like that can be constructed to a lot of different guys.
What Kyrie's really good at too is getting teammates involved. When somebody is starting to heat up, like he has a really good sense of, I'm going to make sure this transition, we're looking for this guy for the fast break three, or he loves, like, he starts bringing it up and then passes to somebody else and lets them initiate the offense. That is one good thing. That is one thing that I do think makes that whole process, that whole mentality a little bit easier when Kyrie's there to kind of delegate who's stepping in, who isn't.
I feel like it's more of his superpower, though. When you can just flip it on, like, okay, I can get myself going at the. A lot of people can't do that. They need rhythm shots. They need to touch it. When he determines that, okay, I'm going to go off, it's like a light switch for him, and I don't think anybody else is like that in the NBA.
Have you ever felt like that?
No, I need rhythm shot. I need layups.
I mean, it wasn't that one time
throws.
you dropped 47 in a game.
But I need rhythm shots to get going. Like, you know what I mean? He like literally at any point in time in the game. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the first quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. He can flip it on. I can give you some buckets, like, but I need to figure it out as the game goes on. Like,
real quick before we take our first break, because we talk about being a starter and a reserve and the mentality that goes into both. When you're trying to navigate that through the course of a regular season and knowing what role you got to play night in and night out, what's the mentality to keep yourself focused and ready to stay within yourself, no matter if you're a starter or a reserve, to make sure you're playing your part, helping the team in that particular game on that night?
I mean, I feel like we always play to your strengths, and that's I think a lot of guys in the NBA do. Now, whether that's coming off the bench or starting, that kind of figuring out what you need to do. When I was a starter, obviously my focus was on getting other guys involved and then going off offensively, depending on how the night goes. When you're off the bench, it's like you got to read the situation, read how the game's going, how the flow is going. We shooting too many threes when you get to the paint. Are we in the bonus? I mean, you're more reading the game from the bench and understanding when you come in, like, okay, this is the direction I need to go.
The other thing that comes to mind, just talking about mentality and roles, I remember back when Josh Howard was the first quarter guy.
Yeah.
And it was Dirk and it was Jason Terry, but Josh Howard every time. So even though he was the third scorer, he also had kind of a carve out to, this is when you're going to cook. Yeah. We're going to look for you. Yeah. They kind of do that with PJ, where they start most games with a post up to him. And it is an idea, I think, that, hey, you are our third scorer more nights than not. So we're going to look to you now. Have the post ups gone great, especially of late? Or maybe they should be seeking them out more in mismatch situations. But I do think I would imagine that's a lot of where that mentality comes from.
Yeah, no, especially playing by Jot. Like literally, our goal was to get him 20 in that first quarter.
Yeah.
Now
and he did more often than not. It felt like,
but that kind of just set the table for us, and it allowed Dirk to kind of ease away in the game.
Right.
Reading how they were going to trap him, what kind of defense is thrown at us, and 90% of the players going Josh's way, so we knew we were going to get off to a good start, and then off we go. We read the game from there.
Let's take our first break here on the DLLS Mavs podcast. More with our special guest, Devin Harris, live in studio. We got some questions for him, plus an interesting piece of trivia that he was involved in. We'll see if he remembers. We'll do all that and more coming up next year on the DLLS Mavs podcast.
America's oldest college football game is being held right here in Texas on January 30th. Be part of history in making at the 100th East-West Shrine Bowl. It's at AT&T Stadium. Since 1925, the game has benefited Shriners' children and its mission to provide innovative pediatric specialty care to improve and transform the lives of children. See some of the nation's top college football players play in this head-to-head competition ahead of the NFL draft. Some of the largest names in football have played in the East-West Shrine Bowl. Tom Brady, Paul Hornung, Walter Payton, Roger Staubach. That's a lot of names. Lawrence Taylor. Shout out Lawrence Taylor. Is it not a lot of names? Yeah, that's a lot of star power. There's gonna, even current NFL players like Brock Purdy, Isaiah Pacheco, Zay Flowers. They played in the 22, the 23. So if you're gonna get a chance to watch a future NFL star. The East-West Shrine Bowl has served as a starting point for many noteworthy NFL careers, including 80 members of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, more than 200 members of the College Football Hall of Fame. Tickets start at just $20 and use code DLLS when purchasing 2 or more tickets to receive 50% off. Visit shrinebowl.com to buy your tickets today.
It's time to put your ball knowledge to the test by playing with Sleeper. Make sure that you check out the best fantasy football league platform out there and put your ball knowledge to the test by picking whether your favorite or least favorite players will have more or less than their projected stats each week. You've got the division round coming up this weekend. Chiefs taking on the Texans. I'm taking Patrick Mahomes to have more than 2 passing touchdowns. And I'm taking Chris Jones to have a sack and a half in that game as well. With Sleeper, the more picks you combine, the more you can win all the way up to 100 times your money. Sleeper keeps you in the loop with instant alerts for breaking news and major injuries so you can stay ahead of the game and keep track of league updates in real time so you're always ready to inform and outsmart your friends. If you think you have what it takes, new users can download the Sleeper app and use code DLLS Mavs to get $55 off for your entries when you place a $5 contest. Apply it to any contest, and it doesn't have to be your first one as well. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states. Make sure you check out Sleeper today. As we continue here on the DLLS Mavs podcast with our special guest, Mavericks. Oh, he wasn't ready for Devin. Wasn't ready for the ad reads.
It was no warm up. He just went right.
We just go straight into the ad reads. Got to pay the bills, man. We got to pay the bills. You know about that. We got to pay the bills. So we go straight into them. We got a minute piece.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Anti-charity. Unbelievable.
I like how he was caught off guard, but I was like, what is Katya laughing at? Like, what's going on here? But yeah, we got to do the ad reads. Got to pay the bills. But we appreciate you joining us here on the DLLS Mavs podcast.
We can give you an ad read for next time.
I'm kidding. No, we're not here to make him work. He's relaxing today. He's going to chill out and relax today. Hopefully you're doing the same. Watching us here on the DLLS Mavs podcast. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe while you're there. And also do the same for our podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. As we continue with our special guest here, former NBA All-Star, 10-year with the Dallas Mavericks, and 15-year NBA veteran. Did it feel like 15 years? Like once the career was over with, like you realize it looks like, man, I played 15 years in the association.
It feels like it went by in a blast, but I feel like when I wake up, like, yeah, my body tells me it was 15.
What's the one body part like each night? Like he's like, was it just
it's different parts?
Different one.
Yeah. Back, hamstrings, ankles, you name it.
And I remember we talked about this last season, but the tough thing is like you wanted to keep playing.
I did.
And that perfect storybook ending just doesn't always happen for a lot of athletes.
Rarely do guys get to end it on their terms. It's usually like, oh, I reached out there and nobody called back. Now we'll try to do the G League thing for a little bit, maybe go to China, Puerto Rico, and then kind of off to the sunset. But rarely do you use like, okay, like Kobe, Dirk. That last game, like, all right, I'm shooting all my bullets out. I know this is the end.
I'm gonna jack up 60 shots tonight.
Yeah, that doesn't happen for most of us now.
How do you reconcile that as an athlete when you get to that point and obviously you're looking for the next chapter of your life and career after spending as much time as you did in the league? how did you process that to get to a point where you are now?
I feel like you just kind of ask yourself, do I have any more left to give, I guess. And if you're at peace with it, you can walk away from the game. Well, it's usually for that first year, it's a struggle. I remember sitting out in front of the AAC opening night. I was at what's the restaurant right there? Hero.
Yeah.
They Jet and those guys were on the stage, and I'm just like, I'm supposed to be like shooting around right now. Like, so it's like that trying to get your body used to a change in pace in something you've done for 15 years prior was kind of weird for me. But once I got to the next phase, I was kind of at peace with me.
What was the Devin Harris pregame routine every night?
Get there around 4:15. Usually 20, 30 minutes in the training room, getting warmed up, one-on-one with BD.
Okay.
As we get ready for the game, watch a little bit of film, get a little something to eat, and then off we go.
Did the training room sessions get longer and longer as the career?
I think they were so glad for me. I freed about 45 minutes up for Dion.
Okay. Make sure you got yourself in your body right.
Yeah.
Night in and night out. I mean, look, let's kind of focus in not just from the game last night, but just in the basketball game in general as the Mavericks move forward for the rest of the year. Because one of the things we look at last night's game, right? The last 6 minutes. You're up 7 where the Mavericks 105-98 with 6 minutes. You feel like you got some control there. But obviously, things get a little chaotic. Decisions start getting made in terms of how to get guys involved in the offense. As a longtime player, it's harder to run plays late in games. What is the mentality of a player, especially during those situations? Is it harder to run plays when you get later into the fourth quarter?
I don't feel like it is. I feel like, I was in the studio last night with JJ, and we were watching the game. And when you have something, in our opinion, when you have something that's working, I feel like that's the time to go to it more often. And looking at last night, obviously the pick and roll with Gaff was working. And especially when they were switching everything, he's got the mismatch, throw it in there and go from there. But I feel like sometimes we kind of fall in love with, ISO ball, knowing like, okay, I got a big on me. This is a matchup that, I can win. And typically 9 times out of 10, like you can, but like when you're constantly running the clock down that late and forcing up, shots that may not be good shots, you got to go back to kind of what's working. So last night, obviously, pick and roll was working. That's a play.
Just run it.
Right until they stop it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think what can be tough is if a coach sees a play that was working stall a few times, is it tougher for him to jump in from the sidelines and yell out? You really are entrusting the point guard to run it. This was a whole thing when Jason Kidd came to the Mavericks, and him and Carlisle was a very meticulous, very anal guy about he wants to be in charge of everything that's happening on the court. He's a former point guard. This was his whole thing. He loves control, maybe a little bit too much. And, he would get in these situations, and Jason Kidd basically had to be like, trust me on the court. And when Jason Kidd is the head coach, he kind of has to do the same thing. When Spencer Dinwiddie is out there and he's the point guard, it is kind of up to, okay, last night out of both timeouts, Dallas did run plays. But in the middle, as the possessions kind of go on, it is kind of up to Spencer Dinwiddie, I think, to, assess the situation, to go to what's working or what he thinks is going to work.
I don't necessarily disagree with that, but I feel like the coach and point guard relationship, you can suggest things. And obviously in timeout, I was like, okay, when we're in a pinch and we need something to go to, involve, and they're going to attack the elephant in the room. They're going to find the bad defender out there and try to attack him as much as possible. But I feel like when you got a guy who's commanding the paint the way he was doing last night and really punishing the guys behind him, I feel like that's something that you got to continue to go to.
As a point guard, when you have that realization about who you can attack, how you can continue to attack them, what does that do for you as a player trying to initiate offense, whether it's in late game situations, early on? Like, what is the mindset when it's like, okay, I can go and attack this guy? How you initiate that?
I feel like there's enough time to still try to run a play knowing I can get to that switch at any point in time.
Yeah.
Right? Especially the way the game's played now. At any point in time, I can call that man up and knowing that they're going to switch that pick and roll and I can attack that specific defender. But I feel like also, you don't want to just run that. I mean, other guys need to touch the ball. Other guys need to stay in rhythm.
Yeah.
I still can do that while still knowing in the back of my mind at some point in time, 5-6 seconds left, I can pull that guy up and still attack him.
And obviously you are a really good defender throughout your career as well. How has the art of defending changed over the last couple of decades? Obviously with some of the rules changes, a lot more freedom and license for offensive players to be able to do their thing. How has the art of defending changed based off of the way you were defending and how it looks now?
I feel like there was a point in time early in my career you could be a little bit more physical.
Sure.
Then and moved on to like you couldn't touch people, especially guys like James Harden. I mean, he was impossible to defend. I mean, if you breathed on him, he was getting fouled. So I think at that point in time, it made it a lot more difficult to defend without fouling, especially like the top tier guys.
Yeah.
And now I feel like they've kind of relaxed that a little bit. You can be a little bit more physical outside of jumping into guys' space on jump shots. The new rule about staying parallel, even though if there's contact, if you're in a legal position, they're going to let that go. I feel like I would have been a lot better defender if I had that kind of leeway, and when I was real quick as opposed to later in my career. Yeah.
It's harder than ever though. Yeah. Like with all the shooting in the league, I think so. The NBA loves to talk like there's all these like conversations going about the ratings right now and stuff like that. And I do wonder if a fan sees an open three-pointer, like an open corner three, let's say, to a pretty good shooter, and they're like, okay, why aren't they defending that player? And you flip it over, like the NFL, like everybody understands the idea of like the tight end sitting down in a zone, and that's it's not a amazingly complex thing, but it is an advanced understanding of basketball. Whereas I do wonder if there's to the same level and understanding that the reason that corner shooter is open is because there's a pick and roll on the strong side, and the guy had to tag because you can't play drop coverage because this guard is going to come around and hit the elbow jumper, and then just so on. So you got to tag, and then the zone principles on the weak side. The guy just didn't rotate in time. Like there is so much more nuance. Not to say defending was easy, but it gets more complicated when everybody can shoot and everybody is this advanced of a pick and roll creator.
Yeah, and we talk about ratings, and I feel like where we've lost some of our creativity is it used to be when we take away mid-range shots, used to have to defend a lot, depending on the team, different stuff. And I feel like now everybody's kind of playing the same way in their own kind of version of it. Everybody wants to shoot threes, everybody wants to shoot layups, and I feel like night in, night out, like the defensive schemes are very similar, like because what you're going to see on a night-to-night basis. Where before it was like, okay, well, these guys are posting up. We're going to have to double team and we're going to figure out our weak side rotations. And, this team, they got, 4 or 5 guys that, attack the paint. So it's going to be a jam the paint type of game as opposed to, on the perimeter. Well, now it's just like, it's going to be pick and rolls, stacks. Nobody's really going to shoot mid-range shots. Everybody's running to the 3-point line.
Yeah.
So it's like everything is every team looks similar in how they play the game.
Last couple minutes here before we take our next break, I want to shout out Jacob, who's in the chat. He says, OMG, Devin's impression of Avery Johnson the other night was chef's kiss. Amazing. You got the Avery Johnson in the can one more time?
Do I got the Avery Johnson? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
See? There you go, Jacob. You got the Avery Johnson impression. We got a piece of trivia before we let Devin go, too, because Bobby Marks, who's front office NBA insider, I'm sure you know Bobby Marks.
Bobby real well.
For sure. With ESPN, he had this particular question earlier today that was posed. The question being, who was the last player that signed a rookie extension and was traded in that same season? I posed the question to a couple of folks in here earlier. Bobby, he didn't know. Tim, I don't think he necessarily, do you know? No. Well, the answer is sitting right here to your right.
Well, I mean, I was going to guess Devin Harris.
You probably figured it was. I
had a couple clues that potentially it might be Devin Harris because he's on the show.
That is true. This course happened, of course, in February 2008. You were part of the trade, of course, that went to New Jersey. Can you just walk us through just obviously not necessarily all the details in terms of what eventually got you to New Jersey, but just going through that process and what eventually played out for you, obviously, in the trade?
Yeah, that was a lonely time in my life. I feel like.
Oh no, actually, don't worry about it. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it.
No. We don't talk about it. It's fine. It's fine. No, it's just it was a situation coming into I think my 4th year. Obviously, to sign the big extension, so I was excited about that, becoming a point guard of the future. And then I think when the Lakers made the trade for Pau Gasol, that sent like a shockwave throughout the NBA, and especially in the West. I feel like a lot of teams felt like, oh, like we got to step it up. Like the Lakers have now become the team of contention. And I felt like between that and obviously the last 2 years of us, losing to Miami, and then obviously the first round exit in Golden State, they started kind of looking at it like, okay, who can we add? And obviously being one of the younger, on the cusp of an all-star type player, I become the trade asset.
Yeah.
Right. And I was with, I think, CAA at the time. And I know Jeff Schwartz was orchestrating this from behind the scenes. I moved to Jeff later on, so I got more side information. But J. Kidd determined that this was a place that he wanted to be and felt like he could help them, over the hump at that point in time. Now, how the whole situation was handled, I felt like it could have been handled a lot better.
Sure.
But at this point in time, I think I went out. It was November, December. We were first in the West. We got off to a great start. I hurt my ankle, and then I think I missed the next 2 months. And this wave of information of like, okay, J. Kidd's headed to Dallas. From a business standpoint, I get it. He's J. Kidd,
Sure.
right? I mean, but just the amount of time that it took to get this deal done. Now, there's a lot of moving parts. We had to throw in guys that were retired.
Shout out to Keith Van Horn.
You know what I mean? To come back and be a part of this.
Yeah.
And the whole part of like, and I get it from a team standpoint, but it was the whole point of like, okay, we're not trying to trade you. The whole world's saying that you are trying to trade me.
Sure.
Like it's on SportsCenter on a daily basis for the next 2 months.
Yeah.
And then obviously we go through a trade, and then we have a player nix the trade, and then that makes it kind of really awkward in a sense. And this whole time I'm trying to rehab just to get back on the court.
Yeah.
And it just turned out to be more of a circus than I felt like it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously it goes through finally. And then I get the jersey and do good things.
Yeah, want to become an all-star, and then eventually you find your way back.
Yeah.
To Dallas. Do you real quick? Do you or Jason Kidd ever talk about that?
No, it was honestly what makes it even more weird is when I got to Jersey, I was looking for a place to live. I ended up taking his place.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So ended up working out. And no, there was never any ill will. Obviously,
Sure.
I mean, this speaks to the level of. I mean, the 2 times that I was traded were traded for generational type players.
Yeah.
Jason Kidd and Darren Williams. So, I mean, obviously I must be doing something right.
You must be doing something right. Well, you've been doing a whole lot right on this podcast today. We really appreciate you hanging out with us here on the show today. Of course, you can catch Devin on the in-game and studio analyst for Mavericks Television as well, doing his thing there. We really appreciate you hanging out with us today. You're on the DLLS Mavs Podcast. We definitely got to have you back in studio.
Oh,
for sure.
I hope so, man. It's right up the street, man. You guys,
right down the street, man, for sure.
Undisclosed location, but
That's
it is
right.
It is right up the
Location.
street.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There's the.
We can have wine.
Yeah, I think that was for Devin only. I think.
Oh no, I love wine.
I do too. But
What's the
your
so
preferred-
typically, red, anywhere from red France.
okay,
Okay.
red
Wine.
France,
Yeah.
like a heavier body,
Yes.
like a Cabernet.
More so. What are the French known for? Starts with B. What am I like?
Bordeaux, yeah.
Yes, there you go.
You should try out a Beaujolais.
Beaujolais.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's kind of medium, maybe light to medium, but it's got a little bit more like fruit facing notes.
Okay.
Lovely.
You really?
wine.
I'm about to say a connoisseur.
Yeah,
Clearly had no
yeah.
idea.
And here
I know a little bit about wine.
That's what I'm saying.
I know a little bit about
You've
wine.
been holding out on your wine now. Is that Tim Cato?
I've got a very good friend who's a sommelier. So
Okay.
He has taught me a lot.
Well, let's take our next break here on the DLLS Mavs Podcast. Again, thanks to Devin Harris for joining us here on the show today. When we come back, our Mavericks analyst Bobby Curley going to join us in the show. We're going to answer some burning questions about the Mavericks going into the second half of the year. All that and more coming up next year on the DLLS Mavs Podcast.
Saturday Neon. It's started by 2 college friends.
He wasn't ready again. He wasn't ready.
Oh, no, we aren't ready. Saturday Neon makes officially licensed collegiate logo LED neon signs, perfect for your home, office, dorm room, fan cave, or bar. Check out their new Essentials collections featuring almost 50 of the biggest schools across the country. And Devin, before you leave, yes, they do have Wisconsin. What do you think of this? A little neon sign
like
for
that.
the... Yeah,
that.
Saturday Neon. So as a...
That's right.
So unlike traditional neon, these LED signs won't break or shatter. They still give you that classic uniform glow that you know and love. So head over to SaturdayNeon.com and use code DLLS for 10% off, including if you need a Wisconsin sign for the man cave for wherever. Code DLLS for 10% off.
I'm going to talk to you about Rugged Road real quick before we get back to the podcast. Rugged Road is dedicated to creating innovative and durable outdoor gear for adventurers who demand the best. Our products are designed with the highest quality materials, with craftsmanship ensuring they perform in the toughest conditions, whether you're on land or water. Rugged Road gear is built to accompany you on every adventure. Crafted to handle the toughest environments, their coolers are built to last, ensuring they can keep up with any adventure. Yeah, that's definitely on the shoulder. The coolers are guaranteed, and now Bobby's going to cut into my shot, too. My gosh. The coolers are guaranteed to keep their contents cool for up to 7 days, but oftentimes much longer than that. Perfect for a variety of outdoor activities, from fishing to tubing to camping to tailgating. These coolers are designed to meet the needs of every outdoor and sports enthusiast. So gear up for your next adventure with Rugged Road coolers. Reliable, durable, and built to be used. Rugged Road is your ultimate outdoor companion. Make sure you head to ruggedroadoutdoors.com and use code DLLS for 10% off. Again, that's ruggedroadoutdoors.com. Use code DLLS for 10% off today. Really appreciate former Dallas Maverick and 15-year NBA veteran Devin Harris for joining us here on the show today. If you missed anything, make sure you can hit the you can go back and watch it on our podcast, listen to it on our podcast, I should say, and also watch it here on our YouTube as well. Shout out to all of you joining us here on the podcast as well. I see my man Charlie Saturday. He's in there as well. So shout out to you, Charlie, hanging out with us here on the podcast. We are rejoining.
Wait, is he not here anymore? That's not Devin?
What a downgrade, huh? From him to me.
We love you, Bobby. Don't do that.
I mean,
we love you, Bobby.
You two have combined for 10,597 points in the NBA.
It's true. We have.
Yeah.
We have.
So that's a pretty hefty total.
We had a great run, Devin Harris and me,
right,
in the league.
Right.
That's our Mavericks analyst, Bobby Krell, of course, joining us here on the podcast today. We got some burning questions, though, gentlemen, that we got to answer as the Mavericks, of course, halfway through the season. From a games perspective, because, there's no real such thing as a first half in the NBA. You have post-All-Star break, pre-All-Star break. But the Mavericks, 41 games through the season, 22-19. They get back on the floor tomorrow, where they welcome in the Western Conference's best team in the Oklahoma City Thunder. Special note with that, Isaiah Hartenstein won't be available. He's dealing with an injury that'll keep him out for at least a week. So no Isaiah Hartenstein for the Thunder. We'll have our pregame show beginning tomorrow at 7 p.m. right here on DLLS Mavs for the on DLLS Sports. You guys got some burning questions, or I have some burning questions for you to answer. You guys ready?
I'm so ready to go.
Well, since Bobby is sitting down now, we'll ask him the first burning question here on the DLLS Mavs podcast. Bobby, what's one thing we know now that we didn't know at the beginning of the season when it comes to this Mavericks team?
I think the thing we know now that we didn't previously know, I think we knew this, but seeing it is different than believing it, which is when you mess with a little bit of the hierarchy, things can get pretty weird. Obviously, the quality of the offense with one of Luka and Kyrie on the floor has been really good this year, and that's huge. The quality without both of them has been poor, and I think this Mavs team is so optimized around Luka and Kyrie that all the other guys on the floor at any given moment can defend and also can make simple plays with the ball. That makes you really, really hard to beat, because you are going to be a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. But when suddenly the guys that you usually count on to make simple plays now have to make complicated plays over and over and over again, and they're playing more minutes, they have less energy to defend, so they just get worse at everything. And so I think the thing that we're learning is that everything is very fragile. But it's a good reminder that despite going to the finals, and despite arguably, in fact, I think they got better, at the beginning of the season, you start right back down at the base of the mountain with everybody else. Nothing is guaranteed, and you have to scratch and claw your way back up there. And the Mavs were in the process of doing that before tragedy struck.
Tragedy?
Tragedy.
Yeah.
That last night was a tragedy.
It was.
At least the last 6 minutes were. Definitely the last 6 minutes of last night.
I have learned that goaltending should be automated.
Let's
hurry up and
explained
get that
that
technology
in great detail last night for sure, that it should be automated.
Yeah, I think I've learned, we talked about players that we've learned stuff from. I think Najee is the one who's been most surprising. I've learned that this team's defense has to have Derek Lively on the court, and it just really suffers without him. And, there's been some blips even when he's been on the court. Quite frankly, you can make an argument that the team's defense needs Luka Doncic on the court. Partially because
that's a sentence we never heard before.
This team still defends so much better coming off made buckets than not. And just when you have the offense to set up the defense, I know during the stretch you've been talking, Bobby, about how the defense needs to set up the offense. The success in games needs to come from the defense, but it might just be the case that until this offense gets back humming, that this defense is going to continue to slip a little bit. So, but Dereck Lively's not out there, I mean, that's far and away the most important influential factor.
Yeah, I think you took mine, actually. Dereck Lively, how indispensable he is. We've talked about on this show, Bobby, you made the point earlier before the season started that P.J. Washington may be this team's most indispensable player. I don't know, man. I think Dereck Lively is making a real significant challenge to that.
That dude is good.
Because we have seen the impact of when he's on the floor versus when he is off the floor, and the stark difference that this team has from a defensive standpoint and from a rebounding standpoint, but also even in games when he's in or not in foul trouble, how the difference of that team feels and the Mavericks feel when he is on and off the floor. Burning question number 2, Tim Kidd, I'll start with you on.
Oh,
come on in, Mark. Come on in.
Yeah, burning questions from Marc Stein.
Come on in, Mark. That's our national NBA insider, Marc Stein. It's a busy time for our guy, of course, as we get close to the February 6th NBA trade deadline. Tim, I'll save the last question for you. I'll ask Mark this one. Mark, as you join us here, you all good?
Think so. Trying to be.
All right, so I'll ask you. We're going through some Mavericks burning questions right here on the podcast today. Mark, what has surprised you most about the first half of this season for Dallas?
Honestly, I think it might be that it wasn't until last night that they actually slipped out of the top 6, that they have been so supremely shorthanded going back to Christmas now. We are halfway through January, and like the West, I've heard this comment too when I talk to scouts with other teams and executives with other teams, like the West is certainly deep, but there are a lot of teams in the West who are struggling with stuff. And the chasing path, Denver's certainly put it together. Moving Westbrook in the starting lineup has energized them, and it's helped Jamal Murray tremendously. So the Nuggets look a lot better. And obviously Houston and Memphis have been very surprising. Memphis has been very resilient with all the injuries they've faced. And Oklahoma City has been the class of the West start to finish. But pretty much everybody else is going through it on one level or another. And yeah, there are 12, 13 teams with playoff aspirations in the West, but that's kind of been the Mavericks' saving grace, that as they're going through this tough time. And I mean, last night was just such a dagger because, as we've talked about before, any win you can muster without Luka and Kyrie is just so priceless. And that game last night was there to be won, and to lose it and now have to deal with Oklahoma City at home. And yes, the Thunder will be on the second night of a back-to-back after the Thunder are playing this hugely anticipated game against Cleveland, this rematch with the Cavs. But Oklahoma City is so loaded that they'll be in better shape than Dallas even on the second end of a back-to-back. So, I mean, I guess that's really been something the Mavericks can kind of point to, that they went on that 14-3 run, and this team was looking so good, and Bobby Carrello was virtually dancing nightly in that chair. And now just like finding a way to win any game seems like a mountain to climb. But this West is not punishing the Mavericks like you thought it might.
Last season, the Warriors were the 10th seed with 46 wins. And this season, the Warriors are the 10th seed, but they are on pace for 41 wins.
Yeah.
That's different than 5 games. That's pretty significant.
Only on 4 right now. And obviously that is hugely injury related. Like, they were looking like a top 3 seed when they had their team. And they very much do not have their team right now.
That naturally, honestly, gets me to the final burning question. Tim, I'll start with you on this one. Outside of Luka and Kyrie, who or what will be the biggest reason the Mavericks will, in fact, finish in the top 6 by the time we get to season's end?
I guess I'll say Dante Exum coming back, because they need another ball handler. And it doesn't matter how much we may or may not think that other players could be entrusted a little bit more with those roles. The fact is that Exum is trusted. And if Exum is back in the next week or so and is able to change the team's fortunes, because especially with Kyrie dealing with a back thing, Kyrie is going to miss more time. At some point in the regular season, he's not going to be available for all 26 games after the All-Star break. There's not a chance, given the circumstances of his injury and just the gravity of making sure that he is healthy for the postseason. So they need another ball handler out there, and Dante Exum is their best chance at that.
Bobby?
A reason to feel confident?
Yeah, outside of Luka and Kyrie, real quick.
Luka and Kyrie have played less than half of the total games together.
Mm-hmm.
It's unavoidable to say the more they play, the better the Mavs will be. But also that means, again, everyone reverts back to what is expected of them. That means more Spencer Dinwiddie off the ball as a catch-and-shoot three guy, which he's really good at. That means better quality looks for P.J. Washington. That means more lobs and easier and better looks for the bigs. Higher volume of good looks at the rim. So with them coming on the floor, sure, I expect them to be great, but also it makes it a lot easier for everybody else on the team to be great at both ends of the floor. It's really a rising tide lifts all boats situation.
Mar, you going to stick with us for our last segment of today's show?
Of course I am. I'm sure you guys want to talk protests, trade deadline, you name it.
Maybe we can huff hopium another day and we can get to the news.
Baseball series data to share with you guys, just reinforcing how much I hate those.
Okay. Okay.
Just don't. If I look down at my phone to answer a message, just don't think I'm rude. I am rude, but just don't think less of me.
Because you definitely were like getting up in the middle of like our segment and walking out in front of the in the camera, but we'll let it slide.
You knew who called me, which I can't share, but if you knew who called me, you would have totally blessed that.
Are they getting
Adam
LeBron
Silver.
or not, Mark? Like, what is going on? Just spill the beans.
Wait. Answer that next segment. Answer the next segment. We got to take a break before Bobby kills me. Let's take our final break here on the DLLS Mavs podcast. We'll dial up the Stein line with our national NBA insider, Marc Stein, coming up next year on the DLLS Mavs podcast.
But first, it's time to become a diehard, folks. What we're doing here at DLLS Sports is bringing you 5 shows per week covering each of your favorite teams in town, your favorite guys covering your favorite team, your favorite people covering your favorite clubs. Mavs, Stars, Cowboys, Rangers. Comprehensive coverage 5 days a week, every single game, pregame and postgame, live right here on YouTube, and all that is free. So if you want to support what we're doing here by watching the stream that you're doing now, by commenting, by liking, hey, if you're listening on Apple, or on iTunes or whatever, or Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast, that's great. If you want to join in on the fun, we stream live on YouTube. You can hop in the chat. The chat is great, too. It's full of a bunch of familiar faces. We're building community here at DLLS Sports, but if you want to take your support for what we're doing one step further, you can scan the QR code. You can click the link in the description below. You can go to alldlls.com/diehard to become a diehard. It costs you less than 1 cup of coffee a month, and I know because I just went out and bought coffee yesterday, and it was more expensive than the diehard times 12. And when you become a diehard, you get a free shirt. We got more than 35 designs to choose from, and we got some more on the way. I've already seen some specs, and they look good. And if you've already gotten a free shirt, you want more, hey, you get a discount on any of the merch you could want: shirts, hoodies, mugs, flags, cups, and more. Headwear on the way soon as well. If you're a hat guy, and I know there's a lot of hat folks out there, you get to read the entire website. You get to join the DLLS Diehard Discord Lounge.
Get a physical diehard card.
And you get your physical diehard card. And this is the part of the show where I quickly pull up the most recent signups, and I am stalling for time, and I'm running out of it here.
That's okay.
But shout out to, oh my God, Bobby. Shout out to Chris, who signed up today, but then also people that signed up yesterday: Chuck, Michael, Lee, Greg, and Lauren. Shout out to all of y'all. True, real MVPs, true diehards.
AllDLLS.com. Become a diehard member today for less than $7 a month. Join our DLLS Sports family. Tag us on social media and let us know you're part of what we've got going on here in the movement that is DLLS Sports. As we welcome back in our national NBA insider, Marc Stein. You can always dial up the Stein line at the Stein line, where, quote, the Mavericks, I'm told, have formally ruled out filing an official protest with the league office in the wake of Wednesday's contentious loss in New Orleans, in which a goaltending call was missed in the final seconds. That coming from our very own Marc Stein. What more can you tell us, sir?
Yeah, basically they ruled out filing the protest because they know they have zero chance of success. I mean, the reality is, we talked about this last night, the protest process in the NBA, you can file it if you want to try to make yourself feel better by going through the paperwork, but there is zero chance of winning because the NBA has shown us for more than 4 decades now, the only protests they will ever uphold are when there is a rules misapplication. The most recent protest was 08, 07, somewhere in that range, more than 15 years ago. A protest was upheld because Shaquille O'Neal was incorrectly assessed his 6th foul at the scorer's table when he actually hadn't fouled out. That's the kind of thing where excuse me, where the league will uphold a protest. It's got to be some sort of rules violation, misapplication. They're not going to go back on a judgment call, even when we have video that shows the refs clearly missed it. And so the Mavericks could have filed the protest, but they ultimately decided it's not going to do anything except add to the frustration. We need to move on from this, so let's move on from this. Now, I would say, had Mark Cuban still been the majority owner of the team, I think there's a chance he would have just gone through with it, knowing again full well there is zero chance of success. We saw this from Mark Cuban as recently as the 2022-23 season when we had the infamous national TV game against Golden State, and nobody knew which way the game was going, and there was a Warriors scoring an uncontested hoop. I'm sure everyone remembers that scenario. I'm sure the Corellistrator could do a 10-minute segment on how that whole thing played out. But, the protest was for naught. And a protest here, while it might look good in print and look good in the headlines, it wouldn't work, unfortunately, because the league just doesn't want to open that Pandora's box of redoing judgment calls, even though in this case it's clear and almost everyone is in unanimous agreement that it should have been a goaltend. It was a mistake, a clear mistake. The way the NBA is currently set up today, you're not going to get that overturned, which, crazily enough, I think even the Pelicans wouldn't mind if that would have gone down as a defeat, since they're obviously working on draft position now. But this is where we are, and it's, again, I keep using the word dagger, and I'm probably underselling it. That was a loss that is going to leave a mark. And
the overwhelming reaction I saw from Pelicans fans is them saying that the referees are Wizards fans because the Wizards are the worst team in the league, and the Pelicans were second worst up until last night.
I think it's good that the Mavs are moving on because, first off, don't waste other people's time. It's really rude. Think of the environment. That's a lot of paperwork and a lot of electricity required to send and submit that information. So it's actually pretty based to not file a protest. And also, eye on the prize. But they can move on. We can choose not to. So if you're watching or if you're listening out there, meet me in Secaucus. Grab some pitchforks, grab some torches, grab some big signs, and let's do what we need to do to get this thing changed.
That was very well put, Bobby. That was good.
Secaucus is where the replay center is, but I think you would have to take this to the league office in Manhattan.
I'll take it to Adam Silver himself.
As they say, why not both? I got time, Mark. I got nothing but time. We don't have a game on Saturday or Sunday to cover. I got all weekend.
I don't know where to go from there, but we'll just kick it back to you. What else is in the Steinlines notebook on this Thursday afternoon?
Well, look, I mean, as of 3 o'clock Eastern, which is just minutes away, we are officially 3 weeks away from the trade deadline. So, we've talked about it. I mean, we've seen 4 deals already. At this point, I think, look, we've grown accustomed to the Mavericks always doing a deadline deal, but, I can't say that there is, with 3 weeks out, there's certainly no obvious opportunities at this point. But again, 3 weeks is still a pretty long time, and the Mavericks took their business all the way to the wire last year. And I remember, Tuesday, Wednesday of trade deadline week was about the Kyle Kuzma deal falling apart. And by Thursday, before 3 p.m. Eastern at 2 p.m. Central, the Mavericks had 2 trades. So I'm not trying to call it one way or the other at this point. If I knew, I would love to tell you. I'm not in a position to make any sort of predictions, but just speaking from a historical perspective, we know the Mavericks like to keep all their options open, work the phones as much as they can, and see what comes available. But the reality is, they're working with a much smaller pool of trade assets than they had in the past. They were ultra aggressive a year ago to make the trades happen for Gafford and PJ Washington. So, we're going to get a deadline here one of these seasons where nothing happens. That's just the reality of it. You can't make a trade at every deadline. And I'm sure the Mavs would love to not have to make an in-season trade, because in-season trades, last season was one of those rare times that it did lead to a complete turnaround and a historic run to the finals. You very rarely see that. In the modern NBA, we've really only seen 3 trades lead to an immediate championship. Clyde Drexler in 95, but the Rockets were defending champions and had a guy named Hakeem Olajuwon. So adding Clyde Drexler to that, those were conditions that could lead to a championship. Also in an NBA that Michael Jordan had just vacated briefly for a baseball pursuit. And then we had the Rasheed Wallace deal in 2004, joining Detroit. And Rasheed Wallace was really the last piece to join a team with 4 other really good players. And then we had the Marc Gasol trade in Toronto, the year that the Raptors had also traded in the summertime for Kawhi Leonard. Now, in the more recent past, we've had, the Mavericks did what they did last year, bringing in Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, went all the way to the finals. The Derek White trade didn't immediately lead to a championship in Boston, but, the Celtics made a pretty strong playoff run in Derek White's first half season there. So we have seen some of these more recent deals, the Derek White deal, the 2 moves the Mavs made, make an immediate impact. But again, to make a move and go right on to win a championship, it's pretty rare. I mean, the Mavericks did not think, roster concerns were not the issue for this team. They like the team they put together. Yes, you would like maybe some more help on the wing and some more help in the front court if you could. But this team's issues right now are 77 not being available and having limited available to Kyrie Irving as well. I mean, those are the issues. This team was feeling very good about itself during that 14-3 run when everybody was healthy.
Yeah, it's a different situation as opposed to last year. Last year, what I heard at the time, what I've heard since is the team was desperate to make moves. They were going to make moves. They knew the roster didn't work. They were seeking out. There's been reporting on trades they tried to make that fell through, on other pursuits throughout the league. They were surveying every possible option, and ultimately they were going to pull the trigger on what came available, and it happened to be PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, and certainly those 2 moves worked. To my best understanding, and certainly Marc just said it, it's a different feeling about the team this time. So that doesn't mean they won't make a move, but it is not the same sense of, and maybe they would dispute the word desperate, but it's not the same sense going into this trade deadline as it was last year.
Want to make sure before we continue here with our guy Marc Stein, really appreciate our television audience joining us here on the DLLS Mavs Podcast. Make sure you download and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Is free. Also, tune in for our pregame show tomorrow as the Mavericks take on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Our pregame show will begin at 6:45. It's a home game, so it'll be at 6:45. 30-minute pregame show with tip-off at 7:30 p.m. at the American Airlines Center as the Mavericks take on the Oklahoma City Thunder. As we finish up with our national NBA insider, Marc Stein, to the point of both of you, honestly, I would imagine, Marc, that the Mavericks feel like the biggest acquisition they could get is their superstar in 77 coming back onto the floor. So maybe that negates the necessity of making a trade because you're getting one of the 5 best players in the league back, hopefully at some point prior to the All-Star game.
Look, we've consistently said on this show, I'm going to stick with my reporting on this. I've consistently said we will not see Luka Doncic in the month of January. That obviously means February is the target. But when in February, I think is still a wait and see. And I think, the instinct with Luka has always been hurry him back. He wants to hurry back. He wants to play at the earliest opportunity. But I do think in this case, that caution will still rule the day. And so I think we're going to have to get to February and then see what it looks like. Is a return before the All-Star break possible, or will it have to wait longer? I really don't think we know that timetable yet. I think all we really know is that, we knew there was going to be another official team released evaluation coming at some point this month, more likely towards the end of the month, and then it's got to be wait and see. And that's the difficult reality with this. The Mavericks, when Luka comes back, they want to be able to keep him on the floor. That is the priority rather than, putting a date on it at this point. And so I think that really is, I know it's probably not the answer that people want, but I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
And we will do so as the Mavericks get ready to get back on the floor tomorrow night against the Thunder. They begin a difficult stretch. They'll see the Thunder twice in the matter of a week. That also includes games against the the Charlotte Hornets and the Minnesota Timberwolves as well during that span.
Can I give a really optimistic take about the game tomorrow? Because we had Sarah in the chat. We had diehard Sarah in the chat actually saying, "Give me something to feel good about." And it's been a lot of low vibes around here, okay? Now, photos that immediately precede disaster, all right? Remember when I said this. The Thunder play the Cavs tonight, and that game is going to take a lot out of OKC unless they blow them out, which is possible but unlikely. Whenever they played last time, it went down to the wire in Cleveland. It was a great game.
It's a hell of a basketball game.
They played hard. They played a lot of minutes. Cleveland was a very tough team to play against. There is a really good chance that there's going to be a little bit of a physical and emotional and mental letdown from that game. And that could be enough if Kyrie Irving and Derek Lively II both play. That could be enough to give Dallas a chance to win. But
Dallas has already beat OKC.
It's true without Hartenstein.
And without Luka.
And without Luka.
And without Luka. It's possible. Fast forward to tomorrow, and the Mavs are down by 35 in the second quarter.
All right.
And I will take back everything I said, but until then, I will stand by my take. It's possible. I even feel good about tomorrow as long as Kyrie Irving and Derek Lively II play. And if either of them is out, then I take back everything I just said.
Can we get a Kevin Garnett? Anything is possible? No?
Nope.
Okay. All right, cool. Just want to check in. Make sure.
Can we get an Avery Johnson impression?
I will absolutely not do that. No. There's a 0% chance of that.
I want to ask Mark real quick because we got a couple minutes. I think he can give us this story. Now, you let us know that you have other stories when it comes to, we were having Devin Harris earlier in studio. Obviously, we mentioned the February 2008 trade where he signed the rookie extension. Of course, all the moving parts in that trade. Can you give us a quick one story or something about that particular trade that jogs your memory about how that went down?
Yeah, I mean, look, and Devin told a lot of it, but that trade, it took like 2 or 3 tries to get that trade done. And just to show, that was like at the start of when trade season and trade coverage just became a massive part of my job. And it was the year before, in 2007, January of 2007, I covered Earl Boykins getting traded from Denver to Milwaukee, a seemingly minor trade. But my bosses at ESPN came to me and they were like, Stein, you will not believe the traffic that this story on the Earl Boykins trade is doing. And that was kind of the first time it clicked for me that, like, man, like, And I think the reason why, and so we're almost 20 years later now, and just since that time, more and more and more, every second of every game is accessible to the modern NBA fan. The highlights, a play like last night with the goaltend, it goes viral in seconds. NBA fans can see almost everything their team does. Every post-game interview is shown everywhere. But it's the stuff they can't see that fans want the most, and that's why that's trade talk, trade discussion, what teams are planning in their team building. And so, like I said, it was that little Boykins to Milwaukee trade. It caused such a traffic spark, and that really started changing my approach. So in 2008, Devin is exactly right. The chatter about a Jason Kidd to Dallas trade, it started in November or December. It was clear the Nets were going in a bad direction. Jason Kidd wanted out. He wanted to come to Dallas. It was a nonstop discussion. So that all happened. The All-Star game was before the trade deadline at that point. Remember, the league recently has changed that over the last few years to put the trade deadline after All-Star weekend, because that trade discussion absolutely dominated All-Star weekend. It overshadowed the whole weekend, and the trade was such a big deal. I told ESPN, let me stay home. Let me skip the All-Star game. Don't make me go to New Orleans. I will do a better job covering that trade if I can sit in my dungeon at home and just make calls like I'm doing today instead of being in studio with you guys. If I can just be in my dungeon and not have to be running around covering the All-Star game, I will do such a better job covering this trade. ESPN, listen to me. That is exactly how it happened, because that trade fell apart and came back to life literally 2 or 3 times. And all I did that whole All-Star weekend was write trade updates. I remember Jason Kidd and Dirk got sent to an NBA Cares event in New Orleans together. That caused a big hoopla. And finally, by the time that All-Star weekend was over, the Mavs and the Nets had a deal that the league was willing to approve, because, you know, there was the situation where Devin George, you know, he didn't have a full no trade clause, but he was what you call a 1-year bird, a player on a 1-year contract signed with the team he played with the previous season. So Devin George had the ability to block that trade, and he initially did. And I remember all the consternation that caused. So, I mean, that trade was an absolute roller coaster, and one of the more unforgettable chapters that I've had covering the Mavericks of Dallas.
So you telling me Devin George swung the history of the Mavericks potentially winning or not winning a championship is what we're saying here?
I mean, one of the hurdles. There were other hurdles, but that, you know, like you guys mentioned, you had to bring Keith Van Horn into the trade as a retired player who had to be signed and traded by Dallas in that deal. Jerry Stackhouse did say something publicly about the Nets are just going to waive me and I'm going to re-sign here. That was an obstacle they had to get over. I mean, that trade was a movie in itself. It literally took 2, 3, 4 tries to finally get a trade construction that the league would approve.
And Mark, we can bring this super full circle, because if I'm not mistaken, the Mavs' first game after that J-Kidd trade was in New Orleans, where some mystical stuff always happens at the end of games. And I remember, didn't J-Kidd get benched down the stretch of that game? Didn't Avery, I think Avery sat him or maybe brought him in only for the last play, or he wasn't on the floor for the last.
I definitely remember there was the Mavs had a last-second play and Kidd was benched, but I thought that was at home. That I could not remember without looking up. I don't trust my memory on those details.
Let me see. I don't want to spread misinformation.
In my memory,
the first game after the break was against the New Orleans Hornets at the time, but that was a 9-point.
Tanner says it was. Oh, okay. So it was a couple weeks later. It was the next week at San Antonio. That's the That was the game. The Mavs lose 97-94. Tanner, that is a really good memory.
Shout out to you, Tanner.
What was that, San Antonio?
It was at San Antonio. Let me see what happened here.
I mean, Kidd was not closing. He did not close out that game against the Hornets.
No, so he didn't close out the game against the Hornets, but in the Spurs game, Tim Duncan was fouled with 34 seconds left, and the game was tied. Duncan made both free throws to put the Spurs up 96-94. Dallas calls a 20-second timeout. God, I miss 20-second timeouts.
Right.
Jerry Stackhouse enters the game for Jason Kidd. Dirk misses a shot. Dallas gets a rebound, calls another 20-second timeout. God, I miss 20-second timeouts. Dirk missed another shot. Jason Terry got an offensive rebound, and Jason Terry missed a shot. And then the Spurs come away with it, and the Mavs lose. And I remember that was Jim Corello was not happy with that decision back in the day.
Well, look at that, going down a memory lane a little bit there. Mark, as always, good to see you. We really appreciate it, and look forward to talking with you tomorrow as the Mavericks take on the Thunder.
I will be with you guys in the chair to Bobby's right tomorrow night.
All right, man. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Bye, Mark.
All right.
That'll do it here for us on the DLLS Mavs podcast. Again, thank you to Devin Harris for joining us on the show today. If you missed anything, make sure you check out the podcast or go back and watch us here on YouTube as well by subscribing to DLLS Sports. We'll be back tomorrow for our pregame show that will kick off at 6:45 p.m. right here on DLLS Sports as the Mavericks welcome in the Oklahoma City Thunder at the AAC. We'll have our pregame show at 6:45 with our postgame show 15 minutes after the final buzzer tomorrow. Our national NBA insider, Marc Stein, and our Mavs beat writer, Tim Cato, will join you from the America Airlines Center. That's Bobby Corella, our Mavericks analyst. That's our Mavs beat writer, Tim Cato. I'm your host, Kevin Gray. We are DLLS Mavs. We'll talk to you tomorrow at 6:45 p.m. right here on DLLS Sports. Y'all be good. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.